Hey everyone, Keto Comic here with my long promised history of veganism and vegetarianism video. I apologize it's taken me so long, but it really did take me a while to sift through all the information because I didn't want to give any false information. But I found it very interesting. I really do. And first, I want to preface this by saying I have nothing against vegans. I was a vegan for 3 years, vegetarian 2 years. I did lose a lot of weight. My back The bad thing for me is that I was hungry all the time, and I was really kind of a miserable person because I wasn't getting enough of what my body needed, evidently. So that's my main beef with veganism is the health implications that aren't fully addressed by that side of the coin. But I have friends that are vegans. I actually follow some vegan YouTubers that I think are great people, and I don't want this to come off as an attack on veganism. It's just my perception of the history of veganism. So the concept of veganism dates back millions of years. There's been, as far as like in Neolithic, Paleolithic, we were hunter-gatherers. So in times that we weren't able to catch meat, we ate primarily what we could forage, which was usually berries and greens. So sometimes that was all we had. So yes, we are definitely omnivores. We can digest a wide variety of things as humans, as Homo sapiens. So way back in the early dawn, it was mainly a way of eating to sustain life when perhaps there wasn't game available. Nuts, greens that you could forage. My grandmother, I know this is kind of jumping around, but my grandmother, when we had a farm, we had a cattle farm in Alabama, and she could actually go out into the woods. We had 400 acres around the house, and come back with a huge pot of greens that she would cook up, wild onions, wild turnips, wild collards, good southern cooking, and she would cook it up with a ham bone, but we won't get into that. But she could walk out and find, because she was half Native American, she could walk outside and find those things to eat. So it's just in our historical roots that we've always foraged from the forest for food. So people back in the early days from the cave drawings and things that we have, they were vegan because out of necessity when there just wasn't any meat around. So fast forward to the ancient civilizations, mainly Greece, Rome, veganism came around as a sort of philosophy to not do any harm. With the rise of civilizations rise, they tend to think about the ethics of their existence and how the least to do the least amount of harm. So you have a lot of grand thinkers that start thinking that eating a non-meat diet is better for society and the ethics of society. So you had philosophers in Greece and Rome start to embrace that, although it never really caught on as a mainstream because Greeks and Romans love their fish, they love their meat. But it was a strain of thought. Then you go over to the Far East and the Middle East, especially in areas where Hinduism and Buddhism were the main religion, and their philosophy of do no harm, really veganism or not eating meat took hold. So it was for them a religious philosophy. Now, I'm not going to say that it wasn't a health related because back then medicine was in its infancy, so there wasn't really a whole lot of studies on health anyway or nutrition, so we can't bring that in. But I can say that the philosophy of do no harm, whether it was in a Western society or an Eastern society, came to fruition and became a way of eating as to do no harm. So it started in its essence in a religious and philosophical root. So, and that's the reason you still see a lot of vegetarianism in places like Pakistan and India. If you go into Tibet, places like that, a lot of Buddhists still practice veganism and vegetarianism. I don't think they consider vegetarianism to be as harmful as eating meat because I know some Buddhists in my own life that do eat dairy and eggs. They don't consider that as harmful as long as they're properly sourced. So that's the reason you see things like ghee and things like that in those countries. I also think that's just our biological need for some fats coming in. So yeah. But anyway, I'm going to talk about veganism and vegetarianism on the same plane here. just to avoid confusion. But in its essence, it started philosoph at first as necessity and then as philosophical. So, moving forward into 18th century Europe, this is where it really starts to get interesting. You had an upturn of religions such as the Church of Scotland, which is known as the Presbyterian Church here in the United States, and the Anglican Church, which is known as the Episcopal Church here in the United States. You had a lot of ministers that came out talking about how veganism is God's way of eating. Now, I'm not religious, so that doesn't hold any water for me, but it is an important thing. It built upon those philosophies and religions of the Far East and our past and took it and brought it into the modern form of Christianity or Western religion. So they were talking about how everybody was vegetarian or vegan before the fall of man. Only only then did you have to start to kill animals, even though it was still kind of frowned upon by God. But after the fall, you had to eat meat. It was a punishment. So they talk about going back to the original vegan or vegetarian diet of Eden is the best way to go. So this was kind of a revolution, went along with the whole sinners in the hands of an angry God kind of thing. So that became a thing in Europe. Even though, and then when there was colonization, they came over to the New World. It didn't really catch on in the new colonies just because life was hard. They were having to build communities from scratch, so they did rely on hunting and domesticated animals and things like that. It didn't really catch on until 1800s, late 1800s, when you had people like Sylvester Graham, and he was a Presbyterian pastor, hence Church of Scotland, came over. He started to really propel the ethics of the vegetarian diet, vegan diet here in the United States. And Sylvester Graham, creator of the graham cracker, and now part of the Kellogg's Corporation. So he developed his product as a vegan alternative to things that were made with animal fat, and he professed that as being the best way to eat. And then you had other people like Dr. Kellogg, Joseph Kellogg, creator of the Kellogg's Company, who was a Seventh day Adventist. Now, Seventh day Adventist is kind of an offshoot of Presbyterianism that actually goes back to the Sabbath being on the seventh day or Saturday, which a lot of mainstream religions keep it on the first day or Sunday, but it also took back to so it went back to that. It also went back to the pre-Eden diet of vegetarianism, and also said that after the flood, even though people were allowed to eat meat, it still wasn't God's optimal diet. So again, religious and philosophical in nature. And we talked about McDougall, Dr. McDougall, the crazy vegan that we watched a couple of weeks ago. He's a Seventh day Adventist. So a lot of his diet is fed by religion. So there we have it. It was kind of a offshoot of the European vegan revolution, which was fed by religion, coming to the United States. And then you had these large companies like Kellogg and Graham, which eventually merged with Kellogg. You know, not saying that was the cause, but it's a fact that their products were actually a vegan alternative to other things. And they professed veganism as part, which is probably why there is such a concentration on or emphasis on a plant-based diet in our food industry right now, because you have a big player like Kellogg that was founded on veganism or founded for veganism, still a major player. So that's the reason there's such the plant-based emphasis. I don't think it's so much a religious or a philosophical thing anymore. It's just a profitable thing because our government subsidizes wheat and corn and things like that. So it's more tied to monetary gain than ethics, but it did start as ethics and religion. There was no health basis in it. In fact, Dr. Graham died very young of a heart attack. So it wasn't, certainly wasn't the most helpful thing. I'm not saying I don't know much about the rest of his life. Maybe he was an alcoholic or something like that, but I'm just saying that doesn't stand well. And then you had the profitability of factory farming and all that coming in with with wheat and farm products too. It's not just cows that are factory farmed. Everything we eat's factory farmed. It's just that we're dealing with sentient beings versus non-sentient beings here, like plants. So it's all factory farmed, and now it's just a money grab. And that's the reason that plant-based is so pushed. And then you had in the 1950s President Eisenhower having his heart attack. Then you had um, Ansel Keys coming off with a very heavily cherry-picked China study, and you have where we are today. We're plant-based and high starch based, and commodity crops are being pushed down our throats as the best way to eat when actually they're killing us. Because all the recent medical data coming out shows that we primarily need fat and protein to exist. Very little, we need practically no carb intake. Our body needs some carbs, but it can make the carbs it needs from protein. So the whole vegan vegetarian movement has very little to do with health. It's all about dogma. It's all about do no harm. And I have no problem with that. I think that's great. But I'm also of the opinion, having grown up on a cow farm, seeing how my grandfather treated his animals. I've killed many chickens to feed to make the family's dinner. It wasn't the most pleasant thing to do as a child, but I did it. And I kind of understood that there is a basis for life, that we're at the top of the food chain, and it kind of goes down from there. So that's just my simple take on it. And going back to people like Graham and Kellogg, they also had some other really wild religious beliefs, like they believed that the meat-fed diet led to sexual sin like masturbation. So they developed all these tasty plant-based options to combat masturbation and sexual immorality, because when I'm masturbating, I'm thinking about corn. I mean, I don't know. If you are, that's your thing. I don't judge. Do it. But I'm not thinking of cornflakes with milk while I'm rubbing one out. But anyway, so it's just a lot of weird dogma, and veganism was part of this weird dogma. And then today you have veganism and all of its evolution. You had, what we consider traditional veganism, which is cooked food, plant-based, some processed foods that are faux meats, because at our baser we want meat. And then you have raw veganism, which I think is just a travesty. Then you have starch-based diets, which we saw what that did to McDougall. And then you have vegetarianism, which adds dairy and eggs back in. I think if you're going to go to the happy medium, that's the most sensible, because you're still getting those omegas that you need from meat through the dairy and the eggs. And I think that's more of a reasonable compromise. And then you have pescatarians, which eat everything that a vegetarian eats, plus they add fish. Now, it's kind of funny how no one's ever really considered, because even way back in the Far East, when they were talking about veganism and a non-meat based diet, they were still eating fish. So it's kind of funny how fish has never quite made the cute, cozy cut to be considered an animal. But anyway, so you have pescatarianism, which adds that in, which I think that's fine. I think it's still too low a fat because we need fat, but it's a good middle ground, I suppose. So here we are today, where we have keto, which I'm straight up keto. I do think we need some green vegetables. I'm not straight carnivore, though I do have a lot of carnivore days. Nothing against my carnivore brethren out there. But I do think we're getting a lot of woo into keto too. I mean, you have people like, was it Cervinge, who's drinking blood and human blood? No, 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 no. Let's keep the weirdness. We've got too much weirdness in veganism. Let's keep the weirdness out of keto and carnivore. Let's just eat cooked meat and cooked vegetables and call it a day. But anyway, bring it up to where we are now, where now all the medical research coming out to support a meat-based diet versus a plant-based diet. Now, I know this is a very simplistic view, but I really wanted to show you how a plant-based diet is based in religion and philosophy, things that can very easily be debated rather than solid science. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this very brief overview. If there's more that you'd like to know, let me know. I'll be happy to do a whole video just on Graham and Kellogg if that interests you. I'll try to keep the corn out of the masturbation, but anyway, I just thought that was interesting. But anyway, Keto Comic here. Keep it coming. I'll have more videos coming for you. I really appreciate the support. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Love you guys. Keto Comic out.